You think you can keep me here forever? I'm not the one you should be questioning.
Have you ever watched someone's entire worldview crumble in real time? Baltimore Police Station, October 3, 1949. Sergeant Frank Morrison thought he was dealing with just another troublemaker. What happened in that interrogation room would keep him awake for years. If you love discovering the untold stories behind music history's most incredible moments, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Baltimore Police Station, October 3, 1949. 4:15 p.m. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the interrogation room. Billie Holiday sat in the metal chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap, waiting. She'd been here 2 hours already. A minor fender bender had somehow turned into this. Through the one-way mirror she could sense eyes watching. Officers taking their coffee breaks. Detectives pretending to file paperwork. Word had spread quickly through the station. Billie Holiday was in Interrogation Room 3. The door opened with a sharp click. Sergeant Frank Morrison entered, carrying a manila folder and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He was 43 years old, 20 years on the force, and he'd seen everything this city had to offer. Drug dealers, murderers, thieves. This should have been routine. But nothing about Billie Holiday felt routine. Morrison sat down across from her, opened his folder, and pulled out an incident report. The papers rustled in the silence. "Miss Holiday," Morrison said, not looking up from his paperwork. "Let's go over this again. The accident on Lombard Street. You were driving southbound when—" "Sergeant Morrison," Billie interrupted quietly. "We both know this isn't about a car accident." Morrison's pen stopped moving. He looked up at her for the first time since entering the room. Her eyes were steady, patient, like she had all the time in the world. "I'm sorry," Morrison said. "You've had my statement for 2 hours. The other driver already admitted fault. His insurance company is handling everything." Billie's voice was calm, almost gentle. "So what are we really talking about here?" Morrison set down his pen. Outside the interrogation room, he could hear the station's usual sounds. Phones ringing, typewriters clacking, officers arguing over coffee. Normal sounds. But inside this room everything felt different. "Your music," Morrison said finally. Billie nodded slightly, as if she'd been expecting this. "Your music is causing problems in our neighborhoods," Morrison continued, his voice gaining confidence. "Stirring people up. Making them angry. Making them think things they shouldn't be thinking." "What kinds of things?" Billie asked. Morrison shifted in his chair. "You know what kinds of things. Protest songs. Songs about things that are better left alone." "About lynching, you mean?" The word hung in the air like smoke from a cigarette. Morrison's jaw tightened. "About stirring up trouble," Morrison said. "About making colored folks think they can just do whatever they want. Challenge authority. Question the way things are." Billie was quiet for a long moment. Through the thin walls, they could hear Officer Peterson arguing with someone at the front desk. A drunk yelling about his constitutional rights. Normal police station chaos. "Sergeant Morrison," Billie said finally, "how long have you been working in this neighborhood?" 20 years, Morrison answered automatically. 20 years. "So you've seen a lot." "I've seen everything." "Have you ever seen a lynching?" The question came so quietly that Morrison almost missed it. When the words registered, his face went pale. "That's not. We don't have that kind of thing here in Baltimore." "No." Billie's voice remained gentle, curious. "Never?" "Not once in 20 years." Morrison was quiet. "What about Jimmy Crawford?" Billie asked. Morrison's hand stilled on the folder. 1943, found hanging from the overpass on Eastern Avenue. "Remember that case, Sergeant?" "That was ruled a suicide." "Was it?" Billie asked. Hands tied behind his back, ruled a suicide? The room felt smaller now. Morrison could hear his own breathing loud in the silence. Or Marcus Williams, 1946. Found in the harbor with rope burns around his neck. Accident, the report said. "How do you know about these cases?" Morrison's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I pay attention, Sergeant. Because I remember their names when everyone else wants to forget them." Morrison stared at the incident report in front of him. The words were blurring together. A simple car accident. That's all this was supposed to be. Those cases were closed, Morrison said. By who? Morrison didn't answer. Let me ask you something else, Billie said, leaning forward slightly. In 20 years on this force, how many murder investigations have been closed without arrests? I don't keep track of. How many rape cases dropped for lack of evidence? Morrison's mouth opened, then closed. How many times have you been told that certain crimes in certain neighborhoods weren't worth the paperwork? The fluorescent light continued its electric buzzing overhead. Morrison could hear footsteps in the hallway outside. Other officers going about their business. Normal people doing normal work. You don't understand, Morrison said finally. It's not that simple. There are procedures. Chain of command. Ways things have to be done. Whose procedures? Morrison didn't answer. Who decides which murders get investigated and which ones get filed under accident? The department has guidelines. Who writes the guidelines? Morrison felt like he was drowning. This wasn't how interrogations were supposed to go. He was supposed to be asking the questions. He was supposed to be in control. My music, Billie said quietly, doesn't make people angry, Sergeant. It makes them remember. It makes them ask questions. Questions like the ones I'm asking you right now. Morrison stared at her across the metal table. This woman, this singer, was dismantling everything he'd spent 20 years believing about his job, his department, his city. What do you want from me? Morrison asked. Nothing, Billie said. I just want to understand. When you go home tonight to your family, when you sit down for dinner with your wife and children, do you tell them about your day? Morrison's throat felt dry. Sometimes. Do you tell them about the cases that get closed without investigation? About the families who never get answers? About the bodies that get ruled accidents when you know they weren't? It's not my job to. What is your job, Sergeant? The question was so simple, so direct that Morrison couldn't answer it. He'd known the answer for 20 years. Protect and serve. Keep the peace. Uphold the law. But sitting across from Billie Holiday in that interrogation room, he couldn't remember what any of those words meant anymore. My job, Morrison said slowly, is to maintain order. Whose order? Morrison was quiet. When you maintain order by ignoring murders, whose order are you really maintaining? Outside, Officer Peterson was still arguing with the drunk. A telephone rang unanswered. Someone dropped a stack of papers, and the sound echoed through the station like gunshots. The song you don't want me to sing, Billie said, is about a boy named Marcus Thompson. He was 17 years old. He wanted to be a teacher. They lynched him for looking at a white woman the wrong way. Morrison's hands were shaking slightly. But that's not the song you're really afraid of, is it, Sergeant? Morrison looked up at her. You're afraid of the questions it makes people ask. Questions about why Marcus Thompson's murder was never investigated. Questions about why his killers were never arrested. Questions about who decided that his life didn't matter enough to seek justice. I don't decide those things, Morrison said. No, Billie agreed. But you enforce them. Every time you close a case without investigation. Every time you tell a family there's nothing you can do. Every time you choose order over justice. The room was completely silent now except for the buzzing fluorescent light and the sound of Morrison's breathing. What am I supposed to do? Morrison asked finally. Change the entire system? Fix everything that's wrong with this city? I'm not asking you to fix everything, Billie said quietly. I'm just asking you to remember that the families who never get answers are someone's children, someone's parents, someone's hope for justice. Morrison stared at the incident report. A simple car accident. Property damage and insurance claims. That's all this was supposed to be. Your music, Morrison said, makes it hard to forget. Good, Billie said. Morrison closed the folder. The incident report could wait. The car accident was resolved. The insurance companies would handle the rest. You're free to go, Morrison said. Billie stood up slowly. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Sergeant Morrison? The next time a case lands on your desk, the next time someone tells you it's not worth investigating, remember this conversation. She paused. Remember that somewhere. Someone is still waiting for answers. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Morrison sat alone in the interrogation room for 20 minutes after she left. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The station noise continued outside. Phones ringing, officers talking, the normal sounds of police work. But something had changed. When Morrison finally left the interrogation room, he walked past his desk to the filing cabinets in the back. He pulled out 3 folders. Jimmy Crawford, 1943. Marcus Williams, 1946. Clarence Jones, 1948. 3 cases. 3 deaths. 3 families who never got answers. Morrison carried the folders back to his desk and opened the first one. Jimmy Crawford's file was thin. Too thin. A few witness statements. A brief medical examiner's report. A conclusion that satisfied no one except the people who wanted the case closed quickly. Officer Peterson walked by and saw the files spread across Morrison's desk. "Working late, Frank?" Peterson asked. "Something like that," Morrison said. "Those are old cases. Closed cases." "I know." Peterson leaned closer and saw the names on the folders. His expression changed. "Frank, those cases are closed for a reason. You don't want to stir up old business." Morrison looked up at his colleague. Peterson was a good cop. Honest. Fair. But there was something in his voice now, a warning that Morrison had heard before whenever certain cases came up. "Who decides which cases stay closed, Pete?" Peterson was quiet for a moment. "You know how it works, Frank. Chain of command. Some cases are just complicated." "Complicated how?" Peterson glanced around the station, making sure no one else was listening. "Look, Frank, I've been doing this job for 15 years. Some fights you can't win. Some questions you can't ask. That's just how it is." Morrison nodded slowly. He understood what Peterson was telling him. The same thing he'd been telling himself for 20 years. But sitting in that interrogation room with Billie Holiday, hearing her ask those simple, direct questions, something had shifted. The comfortable numbness he'd cultivated over 2 decades of police work had cracked. "What if we reopened one of them?" Morrison asked quietly. "Just one. See what we could find if we actually looked." Peterson's face went pale. "Frank, don't. Just don't. There are people who don't want those cases reopened. People with more power than you and me combined." "What people?" Peterson didn't answer. He picked up the folders from Morrison's desk and carried them back to the filing cabinet. "Some things are better left alone, Frank. Trust me on this." Morrison watched his colleague file away Jimmy Crawford's folder, then Marcus Williams, then Clarence Jones. 3 men. 3 families. 3 sets of unanswered questions. When Peterson was gone, Morrison sat at his desk in the empty station. It was after midnight now. The phones had stopped ringing. The drunk had been processed and released. The station was quiet except for the night shift dispatcher and the occasional radio call. Morrison pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. Jimmy Crawford, age 19, found hanging from Eastern Avenue overpass, October 15, 1943. Last seen leaving job at shipyard 11:30 p.m. No witnesses to death. Rope burns on wrists not mentioned in official report. He wrote for an hour, documenting every detail he could remember about cases that had been closed too quickly, investigations that had been shut down too early, families who had been told there was nothing police could do. When he finished writing, Morrison folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. He didn't know what he would do with it. He didn't know if it would make any difference. But for the first time in 20 years, Sergeant Frank Morrison went home knowing he had asked the right questions, even if he didn't have the answers. 3 months later, Morrison requested a transfer to the detective division. His first case was a cold case review. Jimmy Crawford, 1943. The case remained officially unsolved, but Morrison's investigation uncovered witness testimony that had been ignored, evidence that had been misfiled, and connections that previous investigators had been told not to pursue. Morrison never solved Jimmy Crawford's murder, but for the first time someone had tried. Years later, when other officers asked Morrison why he transferred to cold cases, why he spent his time on investigations that would never result in arrests, Morrison would think back to that interrogation room, to a jazz singer who had asked simple questions that changed everything. "Someone has to remember," he would tell them. "Someone has to ask the questions, even when the answers are uncomfortable." Morrison never saw Billie Holiday again. But every time he opened a cold case file, every time he called a family to tell them their case was being reviewed, he could hear her voice asking those simple, devastating questions. What is your job, Sergeant? Whose order are you maintaining? Who decides which cases stay closed? The questions that keep you awake at night are often the ones most worth asking. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they're the ones that change everything.